94.9 WDKB. It is our webinar one more time here. This is number 2 for the series so far. Joined here by Dr. Jock Samis and also Natalie Sundquist, and who she is an HR expert. And today we're going to be talking about human resources. We're going to be talking about engagement with human resources, also retainment, and how to recruit. All those things we're going to be talking about. And Dr. Jock, I'm going to let you start things off today.
Well, thank you, Sean. Can we call you Natalie or should we call you Mrs. Sundquist?
Natalie is good.
Okay, because we want to do the correct thing. We want to be HR correct. Hi, Natalie. Thank you for joining us. You know, we've asked a bunch of people in the area what their biggest issues with HR are, and as Sean said, it was recruitment, retention, and I don't remember the third one because I wasn't paying attention to it. But whatever the third one was. So, Natalie, can you address that in broad terms and maybe give some advice to employers?
Sure. First, maybe I can talk about the 3 areas. So in the employee life cycle, us HR people call it a life cycle. And the first part of that is talent acquisition, which is about how we are going out and finding employees and hiring employees and bringing them into the organization. The next part of the employee life cycle really goes around engagement and retention. So that is, how are we going to keep our top talent there and develop them? And so in engagement, it is things like learning and development, it's mobility, it's mentorship programs, that sort of thing. So what I've been hearing a lot about, especially in the last 2 years, is really the focus on not only acquisition, but more importantly on engagement, because I'm sure many people have heard about the Great Resignation, which it's been called. And so it's really finding, how do we keep our best talent? So that's in the role that I play, that's been a big part of what I've been doing, but you can't keep them if you don't find them. So we, in the organization I work for, we have a large talent acquisition team, and there's a lot of work that is done around employer brand. And that's something that I can't underscore enough, is that how do you show up to prospective employees? What do you say about your company? What are you doing? The way you would market to your customers or your end users, how do you do that to market to a potential employee? And that you're seeing a lot more employer branding happening in the marketplace right now. LinkedIn has changed quite a bit in how employers are branding out to people, and it plays a key role. It gives you the opportunity to talk about your benefits, your perks, whatever those may be in kind of this hybrid world, development programs, your leadership, your organizational objectives, that sort of thing. So acquisition and employer brand is key, I believe, in finding great talent.
So, Natalie, is it just a matter of just throwing money at the problem to retain employees, or are they looking for much more?
Well, I'll be honest, in the last 18 months, it's been a little bit of both. We've seen the market go crazy, and it has been partly about money. But what we've heard in the organization I work with, 2 of the 3 top reasons people were leaving our organization were not about money. The third was money, but the top 2 were around opportunity and mobility. And mobility meaning, how can I it's not necessarily a promotion, but how can I learn different parts of the business to give more breadth to my career? And they weren't being allowed to do that. And so they found that elsewhere. We have found that and not surprisingly, a lot of managers find someone good and they want to hold on to them and not let go. And they think that they're doing the right thing for the employee. But in reality, by not letting them find some mobility within the organization, they end up losing them. So not only have you lost them from your team, but you've lost them from the company. So that's been a big part of it. But I won't say that money isn't part of it. It certainly is, but that is always cyclical. And the years that I've been doing this, I've seen that come and go, but mobility is key.
But, so Natalie, the majority of the businesses out there are small businesses. I know the company that you work for. Tell us a little bit about that and how big they are, because is that really going to work for the mom and pop shop or for a 10-person company?
Yeah, that's a fair question. The organization I work for is a large healthcare communications firm with over 2,000 people. So the scale of that is a little bit different than perhaps the smaller organizations, but I still think that there are things that you can do with that and scale it down to a smaller company. So learning and development or mobility perhaps is even easier when you're in a smaller organization because you can give people the opportunity to stretch while still covering their current role. I do think that there are things that you can take from a large company and scale down, but I can't say all of it. And I know that money can't always be done. So what are you doing if it's not about money? What's the opportunity or the learning that you're providing people, particularly junior talent? What can they get out of the opportunity? And then perhaps you plan for that turnover. So it could be if you hire someone out of school, your goal is to keep them for 2 years and give them everything they can to then set them up, but you're getting what you need out of them. So there might be a strategy about healthy turnover if you're a smaller organization.
Right. All right, Natalie, I do have a question for you. Jock, you mind if I jump in here and ask this question?
Well, you woke up, so thank you for that, Sean.
All right, you are welcome. You had mentioned engagement in the beginning, and I think a lot of people know what that word means, but how does that, is that a traditional role of an HR person? And is the HR person the one responsible for the engagement, or are you trying to talk to the other admin or the other managers about engaging with their staff so that way they are able to retain them?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, absolutely. That's a great question. So it's interesting because HR has a seat at a leadership table like they probably haven't before. And part of our responsibility is helping leadership and managers understand the employee experience, and that is engagement. So it is sitting down with, I just did this recently and sat down with a leadership team where we were seeing some high turnover. And what we did is analyzed some of our exit data, and then we started putting together plans. And some of those plans that we asked this team to really take action on were things around one-on-one meetings with some of their employees, doing lunch and learns to share experiences and trainings. And so it's really, while HR is heavily involved in it, it really is the responsibility of leadership and managers. People most often, when they resign from a company, are resigning from their manager versus the company. And so I think that's a really good question about the role of HR versus managers.
Well, I think that brings to point that a lot of companies should have somebody handling HR duties and not just, oh, well, the supervisor, he's the HR guy, when really he's not. He's a supervisor, he's managing people, and he's just trying to hire people. I think HR goes beyond just hiring people, and I think that's the one thing that gets lost in translation when you hear human resources. Oh, we can't afford that. We can't afford to have somebody just sit there and hire people, but there's more to it than that.
Yeah, it's funny. My career trajectory was, I was not an HR person. I started out in advertising as an account person working on big brands and made the transition. So I get it. To me, sometimes HR can be a 4-letter word because people don't have trust in it. They think it's the no people. And that's been probably my biggest goal is how do you start earning that trust and getting that seat at the leadership table to show what HR is capable of. And especially at a smaller organization, I do think it's important to have someone that has that knowledge to help the owner really understand how they want to grow the company, to really help be a strategic sounding board on organizational objectives, and then how do the people objectives fit into that. So it can be, in a small company, you have recruiting and HR all kind of rolled into one person. Larger companies, that breaks out and you've got different departments within the HR function. But I thank you for saying that. I do think it's one of those things that people tend to downplay a little bit because they think they can probably do it. And once you scale to a certain size, you start to realize you probably need a little bit of help.
Sounds good. Sorry to interject there,
Natalie,
Dr. John.
If you are a small company, are there maybe a couple of courses that you could send someone to, or me as the owner I should go to? I mean, do you have any recommendations?
Yeah, absolutely.
As far as that goes?
Yeah, there's an organization called the Society of Human Resource Management. And that's where not only can you go through, I've got my certification as an HR business person, but anyone can go to their conferences or go online. I believe it's shrm.org. And you can go on and look at helpful tips. You can join SHRM, whether you're accredited or not. And they do have conferences and online classes that are beneficial for small organizations. In fact, we have a friend of my husband's who has his own company, and he actually attends SHRM every year because he takes on a little bit of that role of HR. And so he does that to help himself and educate he and his other leaders on some of the HR principles.
And is it specific to what the issue may be? I mean, whether it's retention or hiring, is that how they do it?
Yeah, they've got they have their annual conference is huge. Thousands of HR practitioners go, and there's all sorts of learning that you can pick and choose to go to. On their online portal, you can pick if you're looking, if you've got questions around labor relations laws or talent acquisition, you can go in and search out that information. There's a lot of really good information through SHRM. And I've been a member, gosh, that was part of going back to school. I wanted that certification to show that I actually done my work. And it's been hugely helpful. I use it, honestly, I just used it last week to check something that I was a little rusty on.
All right, Natalie, what about this? Obviously, besides everybody under the sun needing staff right now, it seems like everybody's shorthanded. Besides that one obstacle, what are some of the bigger challenges that you're seeing in the HR world right now?
Honestly, it's all culture. So it's interesting, especially for those that are in the virtual world with the pandemic, is how are you building and retaining a culture when you're doing it all through a Zoom box? And getting new hires to feel like they're part of an organization. In fact, the company that I work for now, I started during the pandemic. So there are the majority of the people I work with on a daily basis that I've never met in person. And so how do you develop those relationships, and how do you create an environment where you can do those hallway chats? And so I think that's a big part of it, is retention. That's our biggest goal, that and engagement. And right now, the average engagement score, according to Gallup, only 36% of U.S. employees are truly engaged in their current employer, which is a relatively low number, especially when you look at turnover. In 2021 was over 50%. Average turnover for companies is usually 12 to 20. So clearly that lack of engagement or that feeling connected to a company or a manager is, I think, something that anyone, large to small, are dealing with right now.
Yeah, those are some incredible numbers. I saw Jock shaking his head yes. So, I mean, are you seeing some of that same stuff, Jock?
You know, I'm not surprised by the number, but I am surprised by the number. 50% is just a big number. And if you look at it, it's a 2.5-fold increase. So no wonder employers that I talk to are pulling their hair out most of the time saying, what are we going to do? Natalie, I get into this discussion a lot with HR professionals, or just maybe not professionals, maybe HR people. And the question always comes to, and I've been a student of business for a long time because I'm an old guy, but what I've seen for years is they ask employers what employees want, and then they ask employees what employees want. Now, from the data that I've seen, over 30 years, the employer will say money's number one, benefits is number two. The employee will say being in on things, having a voice, and learning are their three. This is a big disconnect. Mm-hmm. So why haven't people seen this? Or are they seeing it now?
It's funny. We do an engagement survey every year, and some of what you're saying, we're seeing. And what the disconnect happens is you can ask each audience what they want, but then what are you doing with it? And I think that's what happens is then business gets in the way. And so there may be the best of intentions, but the actions aren't put into it. And part of every leader has to really look at how are they going to affect those numbers. So what are we doing this year? So we heard loud and clear that people were leaving because of a lack of mobility. So what we've done is we're getting ready to launch a large mobility program across the organization in the next couple of weeks to specifically address something that came out of an engagement survey. I would encourage leaders or owners of small businesses to look at how can you best draw out engagement information from your employees. Even if you're a 20-person organization, how are you asking questions that puts your employees in a place where they feel safe to give the information? And then once they give the information, how are you going to come back and tell them not only that they've been heard, but what's one thing that you might be able to take from that, and then measure yourself on over the course of the year. Accountability and action is a big part of it.
I would say even a good follow-up question to that is, do you see employers spending more time trying to recruit than trying to retain right now? And then some of their current employees kind of get left or pushed off the wayside because they're so focused on trying to fill those holes and those gaps that they're not getting the engagements with their current staff. And then it's coming back around to bite them because they're losing those people while they're focusing on trying to recruit, but yet they're not so much focusing on the engagement. And I'm sure it's a fine line for an employee that you have to walk in order to do all that.
Yeah, it is. What a cycle it is. So there's something else in the HR world called a talent assessment, or a 9-box. And that's where leaders and HR will work together to identify your top talent. So, to be really frank, not everyone is a top talent, but if you take this box and you look at those people that are in the upper right quadrant, which are high potential, high performers, that's where you really want to focus that engagement and that development and that mobility. And on the flip side of that, there's your bottom left box, which is you score on a number of different things, but the bottom box is where you've got underperformers. And so your attention needs to be on either improving them or moving them out of the organization so that they don't drain your top people. So the same sort of thing with recruiting, right? Is that you need to get people in so that you're taking pressure off those top talent. It is a little bit of a vicious cycle. Lots of times the turnover happens because those top performers are doing twice the work as you're trying to get the hires made. And so then they get burnt out. And there's no easy solve right now. This is a market that I've never seen before in my 20 plus years of people moving and changing and expectations on employers being higher than ever before.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Well, yeah. So Natalie, is it easier to retain the higher achievers, or is it easier to or train the lower achievers to be better?
That's a tough one. It really depends on when you're looking at those underperforming talent. Do we believe they have the potential? And many times they don't. So sometimes it does lead to the tough conversations of needing to move people out. Where we would always invest our resources and our money most would be in those people that are high potential, high performer. We watch. If we feel like someone has landed in that bottom box, and we still think that there's something there for them, we will go ahead and put together a plan so that we can see. We don't want to let it go on forever, but we will put something in place for us to see, is this person capable of being able to move into a box that shows that they're able to perform? And if they're not, then we probably have that hard conversation. And
Is it
leading up to
matter
termination.
I'm sorry, Natalie.
No, that's okay.
Is it a matter of a bad hire at that point, or they sold themselves? Or, I mean,
sometimes there can be people that are, especially if you're in an organization that's going through rapid growth, there can be bad hires made because and especially right now in this market, you're so desperate to get somewhat arms and legs in to help do the work that sometimes you hear what you want to hear versus really scrutinizing in the interview. And I have a feeling right now there's probably a little bit more, I won't say bad hiring because that makes the intent seem wrong. The intent is always good. They're trying to relieve their top performers, but they're doing it so quickly, or they're so desperate for it that we don't always make the best hires.
So what do you guys do? No, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So, Natalie, what do you guys do? What's the process of vetting potential employees for
Well,
your
we-
organization?
Yeah.
Or even better, what advice could you give smaller businesses about that vetting process?
I think a lot of it is really looking at interviewing. You want to understand skills and experience, but you also want to look at behavioral questions. So asking people about situations that they could find themselves in with the role that you're interviewing for, and asking them how they would handle it. Those behavioral questions really can help dig underneath how someone's going to respond in a time of stress, in a time of question. So behavioral, and then the skills and experience. And it's really, if there's going to be an interview team of, let's say it's 2 or 3 people, those 2 or 3 people really aligning on what they're looking for in the position before you start to hire candidates. I've seen it happen many, many times where 3 people could be interviewing. They're the interview managers for the same role, and each one of them thinks the role is something different. And then they're surprised when they hire someone who doesn't work because they're each measuring them on different criteria. So we call it a kind of an intake form to get the internal team aligned. What are we looking for? What are the top 3 most important things that we need to see out of this person? Or even talking about what does success look like, and sort of creating a description out of that. And it helps feed the questions. I would also say, and people have an opinion on this, but you could do an interview where it's 2 or 3 people interviewing a candidate so that the hiring team is aligned on how they're hearing the answers. That's a little bit more of a judgment. Not everyone's crazy about that, but it's a possibility.
Natalie, I did want to ask you a question.
That's very interesting.
Sorry.
No, go ahead, Sean.
No, I did want to ask you a
I
question
was just
about
following along with the conversation.
Yeah, and you were doing better than I am because I'm skipping all around. I'm going to different places.
Okay.
But when you were talking about employee retention, and you talked about those top tier performers and the people in the bottom box, how do you get them up so that way you don't bleed out or drain the top performers? Do you consider the coaching and counseling aspect of things? I mean, I guess I'm a little old school like Jock here. That's where back when I was, first starting out work, that was a big term. Coaching and counseling. That's how you get your bottom tier performers to get up to your top tier performers. Is that still a thing, or am I just missing the boat here?
No, it's still a thing. It's still a thing. So coaching and mentorship, yes. I will say though, it depends. So if you've got someone that's in that bottom box, it's really a tough conversation with the leader about where are they falling short, and where they're falling short, do we think that can improve? Otherwise, are we putting the investment that we're making in someone that we don't believe is going to be able to succeed? And then, then you've got that. I would focus that time and attention and resources again towards the kind of middle box, which is your steady employees that maybe aren't the highest potential, but boy, they've got something, and really keep it there.
Well, and the reason I guess I bring that up is because coaching and counseling, it seems like if somebody's underperforming, it's really easy, at least in the past it was, to just get rid of them and then just find somebody else. But now you can't, it's really hard to find somebody else. So I think you really have to go into a lot more coaching and counseling to help keep your retention up there.
Right. And so if someone is not performing, and you're struggling with your performance, you can put them on, it's called a performance improvement plan. And it's really putting together the documentation outlining for the employee, here's the areas where they are not meeting expectation. If you're putting someone on a performance improvement plan, the intention, at least in my opinion, the intention always has to be that you want that person to improve and get off that plan and have a long, successful future with the company. If that's the intent, then you work with them by giving them that direct feedback. If that's not the intention, then go the different direction and have the hard conversation. But, to me, you always want to see someone succeed, but managers have a really hard time giving that feedback until it gets too late. And so having constant feedback with employees when you see them do something that they could improve on or that they've done really well, giving them constant communication to help them tailor their performance is critical.
In case I know we lost you there for a minute, Jock, but we were just talking about coaching and counseling and how that helps, to retain people instead of just making the tough, well, not even a tough decision, just saying, this person's not working out. We're going to let him go. Should you try to coach and counsel them, or should you let him go? And we were just talking about how does somebody go about deciding which direction they're going to go.
Thank you, Sean. I really didn't care what Natalie was saying. That's why I hung up for that very short time.
Story of my life for HR.
So, Natalie, as I think about this, you talked about behavior, trying to measure behavior with scenario type questions. Do you have any in your back pocket that you'd like to share with us?
I will. A couple of questions. One is I always ask someone about a failure. What's a failure that you've had, and how did you respond to it? And it's interesting.
Do marriages count?
They could, but I wouldn't ask because you can't ask people about it. But
okay.
Asking them about a failure and how they responded to it, and even how they defined the failure is telling. And then I always ask people, like, if I were to ask two people 3 words to describe you, and I'll ask someone professionally, and then if it was your mom, and ask them to give me those 3 words. And that generally can tip us into a conversation that gets around to some behavioral things. But I'm big on people being able to admit that they can trip and then pivot back and do better the next time, or what have they learned from it? Those are a couple. It's been a few years since I've been heavily involved in recruiting, but those were a few that I used.
Nice. So you don't do that, how to figure out, tell me how much AstroTurf there is in the world, or that kind of thing?
No, I worked in a place where we had a manager, and he insisted every candidate, he'd put the pen down in front of them and say, "Sell me this pen." And I was like, "Stop." And at that time, that's more about intimidating a candidate versus having a 2-way dialogue. And so if your intention is to try to fluster or throw them, then if I'm a candidate, I'm looking at the company going, I'm not sure this is the place for me. And I think that's a big thing, especially in the market right now, is that candidates are interviewing us. If not more, then we're interviewing them. So how are we showing up in those interviews?
And I think that has a lot to do with what you had just said about, who's doing the interviewing, somebody from HR or a manager? Because a manager would say, yeah, sell me this pen. But an HR manager is going to take a different approach to that. It may get the same result at the end of the conversation, but it's the process of the conversation that I think is different from an HR perspective versus just a direct manager.
Yeah, and that's something too that SHRM would offer some resources, but really interview training to help managers understand how to ask questions, when to ask questions, and then more importantly, especially if you're a small business, knowing what you can't ask and not tripping yourself up in those places that can go illegal very quickly. And it's real easy to Google some of that, or to go to the SHRM website and to do a little bit of education. There's also a lot of training out there for interview training.
That's a good news for us, Jock. They can't ask us how old we are.
No.
Although, Natalie, speaking of that, do you eliminate your dates on your resume because of that nowadays?
Our TAs have not. I don't believe our talent acquisition team is doing that. I will tell you, there was a time when I was a recruiter that I pulled dates off of resumes because our managers were comparing to their own careers. And so instead of just looking at what has the person done, not for how long they've done it. And so I did old school, white out some dates. That takes me back a ways. Did white out some dates so that we would get a hiring team to talk about the skill and the experience versus how long the person had been doing it. It all depends on your hiring managers and what they're looking for. I've had other hiring managers that were really, they were involved in the pedigree of where someone went to school. So they might dismiss someone that went to Eastern Illinois University over Villanova.
As an example, yes.
As an example. And the not giving the person a shot simply because the pedigree of the school wasn't there. So, depends on the hiring managers. And that's why interview training is, I think, critical to make sure that you're really getting the best talent versus who looks right on paper.
All right, and I know we're getting close to time, right, Sean?
Yeah, we're getting close.
So, Natalie, can you give us 3 takeaways that a small business employer should really know or think about or work on?
I think for small business, it's really how are you presenting yourself to the candidate market? Because you're competing, whether you're small business, you're competing against large companies. So how can you differentiate yourself from a large company? What can you offer to someone that would be different that they wouldn't get from being a large number? To really listen to your employees and take that feedback and then action on it, hold yourself accountable to the feedback, and then really groom and grow those that are showing the greatest potential. How can you, it doesn't have to always be a monetary investment, but how can you invest in their development to get them to stay, and showing them that they have a path?
So I actually have two other questions now. One I thought of before, one I thought of just now. The one I thought of just now is, do you treat all employees the same?
Well, yes and no. I mean, it's interesting. After doing a talent assessment, I mean, on a base level, absolutely, you treat your employees the same. But if those people that are showing the highest potential and high performance, if I've got 5 executive coaching slots, I'm going to give them to those than I am versus those that are lower performing talent. Am I not going to help the lower performing talent? No, but I am going to give them more of the development opportunity to those that are showing the highest potential and the highest performance.
Okay. My last question, I promise, Sean, is culture out the window now because we're desperate for bodies?
It's not out the window. It's just more challenging, especially because I believe the world's going to continue in this hybrid space for some time. There's so many employees that do not want to go back to an office. I know I don't miss a 90-minute commute. And so it's really, how do you start to develop that connection and that culture in a hybrid world, and looking for special moments to get people in person, but still allowing flexibility. And that's going to be key, is giving employees flexibility.
All right. So I'm going to end with this one, Sean, for me.
All right.
So, in The Graduate, Dustin Hoffman, the word was plastics. What's the word now?
Oh my gosh. What's the word now?
Come on, you're old enough to know this, Natalie. Don't kid me.
No, The Graduate's a little old for me. I was quite young.
Wow.
So, geez,
Then never mind.
Yeah, you're not that I like the word. I think I said the words. I think it's retention and it's engagement. So there.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
So there.
Sure. She gave me as much grief as you normally do.
I know, and I liked it because I didn't have to do it this time. All right, Natalie, thanks for joining us, Dr. Jock. Amusing as always having you on the webinar. We appreciate it. This is part 2 of our small business development webinar series for businesses. This is about human resources. This is about retention, engagement, and what was the other one? Retention, engagement. No, I already forgot. Recruitment. That's it. So we're trying to keep those employees and also get some new ones in a resignation. The great resignation world. I think that's kind of where we're at right now. So, Dr. Jock, Natalie, thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Natalie.
Bye.
All right. This is 94.9 WDKB.